Hello and welcome to Dead Drop Media. Please enjoy the following production with the hopes of acquiring a sense of relaxation.
Hello, welcome and one and all to Episode 2. My name is John Webb III, producing under the name Dead Drop Media. And if you remember from the first episode of this brand new podcast, I talked a lot about myself, about my intention of making a new career out of producing, out of making music, and now out of making podcasts, maybe videos later, who knows. But anyway, this episode I decided to change things up a little bit compared to the first one. So I was speaking with my wife, and she thinks I should do an episode about autism, more specifically Asperger's. Because as mentioned in the previous episode, I have Asperger's. I was diagnosed as such. What's interesting is that in 1994, the American Psychiatric Association recognized that diagnosis of Asperger's syndrome in the 4th edition of its Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. And I'd read that on Nature.com. I'm actually quoting directly from a website here. But I thought that was interesting because I was born in 93. What I don't find as interesting is Asperger's is named after Hans Asperger, who was kind of celebrated as a hero for discovering autism, and I'm not really sure exactly what else, but apparently from this article, the truth about Hans Asperger, and from what I've heard from other people, is he was a notorious Nazi in World War II, and he experimented on neurodivergent children and murdered them because the Third Reich was seeking for a nation that was pure of anyone that didn't fit their standards or criteria. And of course, the same type of attitude carried over. I was never open about having autism before, because there was a social stigma attached to it. I come from a charming little hamlet that some of you may know as Laurel Lake. It's a thing of fantasy, and it was very mystical. Well, it was mystical and full of meth and heroin, but that's a different story. But in this little charming hamlet, all the kids, toxicity was their main way of talking to each other. And, standing out was never really a good thing. I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of brotherly love, or whatever you want to call it, between me and my friends and such and so forth, but never felt comfortable about saying anything about having I thought it was a mental disorder. As a matter of fact, I believed that it was a mental disorder so much that I wanted to prove that I didn't have it. I even told the neurologist that I believed I had been misdiagnosed. I had such a negative attitude towards it, especially when I told my first girlfriend. And she said, "That's okay, you're special in your own way." It was very condescending. But the good news is, people are a lot more open about it in this day and age. People like Neurodivergent Rebel, if anybody follows them on Facebook. Lyric Holmes, they're actually an activist. And I think that that's pretty cool. Hope I'm pronouncing their last name right. But that was actually how me and Gabby got into this whole being open about it thing, because in Neurodivergent Rebels Facebook group, there's a lot of people that have struggled with their particular neurodivergent traits and how to deal with people's reaction to them, and how to just be themselves without people thinking that they're weird or strange. And when I saw all these people in their stories, I realized a lot of their traits matched up with mine. So let me just ask you a few questions in regards to traits. You ever go to school and there's these bright fluorescent lights that hang overhead? I hated those damn lights. I just felt drained of all my energy. And I told people about it all the time, and the only person I could relate was my history teacher. I really wish I could remember his name, but he's like, yeah, they just drain the life out of you. And I'm just like, wow, man, you get me. You really get me. That's awesome. But of course, there was other things. I have very bad handwriting. Apparently, that's an autistic trait I didn't know about. But I also hated the way that graphite felt against paper. Always did a lot better with pen, but of course in school, you have graphite pencils. And I didn't understand a lot of other kids either. I was always quiet and reserved, and I just wanted to talk about stuff I wanted to talk about, which was, Pokemon and Final Fantasy, and some very narrow things that didn't really get social interaction very well. I had hand tremors on top of it. Another autistic trait I didn't know about, and I've heard people talk about it too. So far we have sensory stimuli and the social issues. Not being able to really bond well with other people. My mom would always tell the story about how my friend, so I had a babysitter, and my friend, his name was Billy, and I would hang out with him one-on-one, but he was having a birthday party when all the other kids were playing. I wouldn't leave my mom's side. And I avoided crowds like crazy. Crowds were overwhelming. Social anxiety, I guess. And in 4th grade, I have a memory. So in 4th grade, I had a college reading level. That was great. That was wonderful. But there was one teacher I didn't like in particular. A very nasty teacher. And just being around her kind of skeeved me out. And I would cover my head up with a hoodie anytime she tried to speak directly to me. And I'm not sure if that's what did it or if it was a collection of things. This was before I was diagnosed with autism. They sent me to a program called Partial Care. So after school, I would go home and a white van would come to pick me up and take me out to a section of the hospital. We'd ride the little elevator and go up, and we were taken to base. These were classrooms, I guess. Of course, it had the typical hospital charm of all white walls and those damn fluorescent lights again. Anyway, so in this class, or series of classes, they had us do these little group activities and projects, and all these kids hoarded together. And they taught you about responsibility and respect. And that was pretty much it. It kind of felt like they were trying to reform me, reprogram me in some sort of weird way. And all I wanted to do was go home after school. I didn't want to be hoarded into a white van like a nut job. Apologies if that's offensive to any of the squirrels out there. I know that you guys do enjoy your nuts, storing them in your cheeks and whatnot. But back to the point. I was in this program for a little while until one of the staff there said he doesn't need to be in here. I don't know why they put him here. And surely enough, I guess I didn't. I was never outwardly disrespectful towards anyone, except for maybe that teacher. I would just kind of shut her out completely. But that program ended, thankfully. I was grateful for that. So now we're back to normal school. Well, I was still in school, but you know what I mean. Back to my routine of going to school and then coming home and going on my Game Boy Color and playing Pokemon Yellow for hours on end. Anyway, so I had the child study team. At some point I had been diagnosed with Aspergers and ADD. Now you can tell I'm kind of old because it's had to be somewhere in the 90s, I think. ADD was merged with ADHD. They used to be different. ADHD was an inability to focus, inattentive focus, I should say, and hyperactivity. I had ADD. I wasn't hyper. I just couldn't focus. And that's the thing about autism, is that usually as a package deal. You're not just diagnosed with autism. Usually there's something extra that comes with it that you're diagnosed with. And I mean, I can see why. I can see how, if your brain is wired a certain way, how being in a environment that's bad for you would cause you to develop symptoms of anxiety or depression or inconsistent moods, erratic behavior, or isolated behavior. I mean, we could be here all day and I could talk about it. And of course, with the diagnosis of autism, I became obsessed with something new, neuroscience. I love learning about the cerebellum, the hippocampus, the prefrontal cortex. I wanted to know how the brain worked and how I could just overcome the barriers in my life. Why I couldn't just be the type of person to say, well, here's something I want to do, so I'm just going to go and do it. It seemed to me as if I was always trapped inside of my head. Like just living daydream to daydream. I would get excited about these things, I would think about them, but they weren't steeped in reality. And because they weren't steeped in reality, I would receive the positive reward to myself, followed by the disappointment of it not being consistent. I was just a chronic dreamer. And that was a barrier all to itself. Nobody could see inside of my head and know what I'm thinking or feeling. But I could. And I would talk to people as if they could see inside of my head and know what I'm feeling. But my emotions were a lot more sensitive. And because I was so sensitive to other things, it made it harder to go to a classroom every day, sit in a chair, and just be made to sit still and work on what they told you to work on. And it's not that I hated schoolwork. I just didn't like jumping through hoops. I just wanted to do things my way. Like the most ridiculous things would irritate me. I mean, in first grade, they would have these little spelling slips, spelling tests. They would give you very simple words, and so I'd always write much more complicated words underneath of them. And of course, the child study team took this as I'm not being challenged enough. I still remember when the child study team would pull me out of the classroom. Because, now mind you, I'm leaving out a lot, like constantly going, being sent to the guidance counselor. But the child study team would also pull me out of the classroom. And this was nothing like ABA, mind you. I know that anybody listening that has, been involved in the autistic community, they're speaking out against ABA, which is very abusive towards neurodivergent people. Treating them like animals and such. Let me get back to the point. So the child study team would pull me away for these meetings, and I remember the one, he would try to show me how to look people in the eye when I'm talking to them, and to give a firm handshake. This was a problem for me. I didn't like being touched by people, and I also didn't like looking at people in the eye. And I still remember I had a classmate once that, wanted me to give them a high five or whatever. Some people I would, and then sometimes I just wouldn't. There was no specific reason for it. I just didn't feel comfortable in doing so. Just a simple hand gesture. And like I said, I didn't like looking at people in the eye. It made me feel very uncomfortable. It made my skin crawl. Like their face was closer than what it actually was. But they still taught me to do that as a form of communication. Like, this is the proper way that you speak to people and interact with other people. Someone's talking to you, you look at them in the eyes. Some animals take that as a threat. And maybe I felt like I was, maybe not threatened in a way, but it certainly wasn't comfortable. The child study team sure was interesting, though. Because they'd always ask me all kind of questions. And as you can tell, simply by the second episode, I love talking about myself. Sometimes I just wish I could stop doing it, focus on other things, but I think this is relevant to a lot of people. And I wanted to share my story, to really get it out there. Because I've never been open about it before. And so I had an IQ of 116. And I was proud of this for a while as a kid. College reading level in the 4th grade, IQ of 116. Terrible at math, but who gave a shit?
Attention listener, you have reached the 15-minute mark. If you've been listening this long, I have news for you. You are a badass and I love you for it. If you enjoy the show, please consider subscribing to patreon.com/deaddropmedia or follow Dead Drop Media on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, SoundCloud, YouTube, or just send positive vibes or something like that. Shit, I don't know. Anything helps. Anyway, back to the program.
It was also, I had an IQ of 116, and I was really proud of this for a while as a kid. But then I learned 116 is actually just slightly above average. And of course, that would have changed over time as all the other kids grew. Besides, I learned that IQ tests are bullshit anyway. They're culturally biased. And I can't really remember what else I learned about it, but there is a whole book on it. And I'm like, damn. So I definitely have different thoughts concerning intelligence versus accumulated knowledge, accumulated skills, life experiences. I mean, these things all play a major factor into how we process information and how we relate to the information. And being autistic, that's like the number one thing that we're looking at. We're seeing people that are more sensitive to certain things, especially when it comes to the sensory issues, like touching things, just like how I mentioned earlier about the graphite pencil. Hearing things, sound. I mean, some autistic kids, they have to wear headphones throughout their day because the sound stimuli is just so overbearing. And there's just so many different ways that, it's a spectrum. Anybody that's learned about autism knows that there's a huge spectrum to it. And different people have different needs. But one thing that was really common with autism is masking. And I think that we all mask to a certain degree, but let me just really demonstrate my point. So, a neurotypical is somebody that meets the standards of what is considered normal. The brain is functioning the way that is expected and the way that it's supposed to, quote unquote. But somebody that's neurodivergent, the brain operates in a different way. And that's all that really means to me. I went ahead on Google just for the hell of it and defined it. Neurodivergent, adjective, differing in mental or neurological function, what is considered typical or normal. Frequently used with reference to autistic spectrum disorders, not neurotypical. So, literally, if you have a neuropathy, then you're neurodivergent. So with the idea that being neurotypical is normal, I'm sure that this has led into what's called masking. A lot of people probably know what masking is, especially if you're out in public, you wear a mask. You hide certain aspects of your personality. You hide your gullibility. You hide anything in between. You try the best that you can to avoid drawing attention to yourself in a negative way. So you gauge the reactions of other people, and you try to emulate those social skills the best way that you can. And you hide behind a mask. And I think this is definitely very prevalent with people with autism. Especially me. That's been like a lot of my childhood. I've always been a shy kid, then I was a shy teenager. And, but sometimes I would go in reverse, you know what I mean? Like, I would just say random things intentionally, just, to fill that gap in the air. Or maybe I thought they were cool, or it would make people laugh. But that was my problem. I didn't really have much of a base personality. I just kind of cherry-picked what I saw in video games or on TV and said, I want to be more like this, I want to be more like that. And then I just molded myself. Now, modeling. Modeling is something that's very natural. That's what kids do. They see the adults do stuff around them, and they just take after them and start doing those things. I can't really speak for all autistic people. I really don't know many, but for me, if that is a part of an autistic trait, for me, that was done with a great deal of attention. And I've done that for so long. Just constantly modeling and trying out new personality types to fit around what I felt wasn't very applicable socially. So you gotta figure, some of these personality types are hard to pull off because, the way that I speak is a little better now, but when I was younger, monotone. I still kind of speak in monotone. And there we go, there's another autistic trait. High vocabulary, speaking in monotone. And that was me. I always had much bigger words to use, much more complicated words to use, just because they just flowed better. But I always spoke in monotone. And it was hard for me to express myself. The funny thing about that is, too, I tried out for school plays. I was in a chorus class for singing. I wanted to learn to do vocals. And yeah, when you have kind of a quiet voice, kind of a dull voice, it's a little hard to get that clarity out there and to project. I remember one time I had a job interview at a Bennigan's, and it was for a host position. So of course the interviewer asked me if I could project my voice, and I tried, and it was it didn't really work out so good. I think it's even hard for me to sit here and make a podcast and talk about this topic, just because I'm telling you everything based on my own personal experience. I really wanted to talk about the actual subject matter by itself more, but yeah, that's about the extent of the knowledge that I have for the time being. I'm looking forward to learning more about the autistic spectrum and meeting people with different attributes. That way I can kind of see more clearly the whole picture instead of just my personal view from within and what I've gone through in my life. The last thing that I wanted to say is I'm a big believer in self-diagnosis. I know they can be dangerous sometimes, but so I was evaluated for autism, and I was diagnosed at a young age. As an adult, it's very difficult to be diagnosed with autism. So I think that if you really look it up, go on Google, ask your friends about it, see if you match any of the traits that'll pop up. And it doesn't hurt to look at yourself and then ask yourself, well, is this me? Because at the end of the day, it's a series of symptoms. Well, maybe not symptoms, but what I mean is that any struggle that you're going through in life, usually you can't just categorize it and just lump it together into one name or format. But then sometimes you can. And who knows? It might help somebody out there a lot to really engage with a community they think they might be a part of. Thank you again for listening, everyone. This has been John Webb III, producing as Dead Drop Media, and this episode has been all about autism, Asperger's, and fluorescent lights. Ugh. So anyway, if you enjoyed the program, follow me on Facebook or something. Or sign up to the Patreon. You've heard all of this crap in the advertisement. Yeah, my little 15-minute mark. Alrighty. Well then. Time to bring this to a close. Goodbye, everyone.
Welcome to Dead Drop Media. Please enjoy the following production with the hopes of acquiring a sense of relaxation.